My compliments to the Global Counter-Terrorism Council for organizing this conference on the theme of a never-ending warfare, the counter-terrorism, which I'm sure and will examine many dimensions of this evil, particularly in the manner in which it is being pushed beyond national boundaries and how it has acquired a global footprint. Terrorism today is one of the most potent threats to global peace and security. Advances in technology, especially in the cyber domain, facilitate indoctrination, recruitment, real-time secure communications. And this also enables the flow of funds. This provides access to an infinite resource of do-it-yourself terror kits. Being a low-cost option, nation-states are sponsoring terror in the pursuit of their geostrategic interests. These elements have collectively made terrorism a preferred mean of waging war against a superior adversary. Let's talk about an Indian perspective on this. Our geostrategic environment, porous borders with adversarial neighbors, and a long coastline have made India a victim of state-sponsored terrorism for many years. A hostile neighborhood has resulted in terrorists and insurgents receiving material support and funds, the main drivers of terrorism. Yet we have handled multiple terrorist threats in different regions of our country with success. This too, despite our vibrant, diverse social and ethnic fiber. Most importantly, India has not allowed terrorism to politically or economically destabilize our country. India has adopted a multi-pronged approach and treats terrorism as a phenomenon with political, economic, social, and psychological aspects, all of which need equal and simultaneous attention. Notably, we have never made a distinction between a good or a bad terrorist. For us, there is only good terrorist, which is a dead terrorist. Our Indian approach to counter-terrorism has been a success story, as you know. Indian state has woven together a number of successful strategies to challenge the affliction of terrorism and violent extremism. These strategies extend across the domains of legislation, diplomacy, socio-economic initiatives, military, intelligence, technological, cultural, and civil society initiatives. India's approach to counter-terrorism has been multidimensional, with kinetic actions being one of the subsets of the whole of government approach. Besides hardening potential targets, securing the environment and minimizing the cross-border terrorism, the focus of ours has been on addressing the root causes. Invariably, the root causes are all political, economic, and social, and these causes are addressed in the same domain along with the skill development and creating job opportunities for the youth. Even our unified command has been yet another success story. To ensure a holistic approach, India has devised a system of unified commands in terrorism-affected areas in Jammu and Kashmir, Northeast, Assam, etc. This has been done under a governor or an elected chief minister with committees made up of all the relevant government functionaries, including the security forces. The Indian experience with security operations in counter-terrorism has been to win the hearts and minds of the people so that the terrorists are denied moral and material support and therefore are isolated. The implementation of the people-centric projects and reforms on the ground has been accorded the highest priority by the government. In a sense, the counter-terrorism strategy can be defined as the iron hand with a velvet glove, as was coined by one of our ex-chiefs. Intelligence has been a very important activity in this counter-terrorism operations. Structural changes have been made to develop an effective intelligence network at strategic and operational levels. Multi-agency centers have been set up at the state and the central level to enhance intelligence gathering, sharing, and coordinating all the inputs. Simultaneously, the NIA, a central organization, was established in 2008 following the Mumbai attacks to effectively lead and harmonize investigation into terror-related incidents in India. My audience today is well aware that a populous nation like ours, with nearly 1.4 billion people and crowded cities, would have been a victim of multiple terror attacks, but for the coordinated efforts of our intelligence and security apparatus. Indian Army's role has been stellar in all these activities. The role of Indian Army has been lauded as an effective model of tackling terrorism. There has been use of minimum force. We haven't used artillery, we haven't used aircrafts, nothing like that for attacking the terrorists or the terrorist bases within our nation. The principles of use of minimum force assume centrality and has guided its actions. Based on its experiences and lessons learned, India raised a dedicated counterinsurgency force at the national level called the Rashtriya Rifles. It has been highly effective due to some unique features, including a light and agile force structure, and as a specially trained and equipped force for counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. The creation of the anti-infiltration optical system, which is like a border fencing but high-tech in nature, called AIOS, over 550 kilometers along the line of control between India and Pakistan and Jammu and Kashmir, coupled with other innovative technology-based anti-infiltration measures, has also resulted in reduced infiltration and cross-border terrorism. In retaliation to the terrorist attack at Uri in September 2016, the Indian Army launched successful surgical strike at multiple terrorist launch pads. These actions have cumulatively helped in bringing down the violence levels significantly and allowed development to flourish. Now a word about countering the state sponsorship of terrorism. While terrorism in all its dimensions must be condemned equally, there is nothing as despicable as state-sponsored terror. The sponsorship of terror by nation state as a tool of state policy, we are taking necessary steps to address the elaborate nexus, the sources of radicalization, those that propound the ideological hatred, and the complex web of finance, the communication network, as also the sanctuaries. When sources of terror receive state support, the consequences of the world are ominous. It is not entirely a coincidence, for example, that the world's foremost terrorist, Osama bin Laden, found sanctuary with our Western neighbor. Countries with regressive thinking that are using terrorism as a political tool need to understand that terrorism is an equally big threat to they themselves. The contours of terrorism is rather complex. Today, terrorism has acquired a transnational character. The terror groups recruit globally and strike across national boundaries. In concert with the agencies of transnational crime, they have decimated complete nations. The unfortunate predicament of Afghanistan and Syria are examples which immediately come to mind. It is also important to remember that terrorism is morphing and adapting continuously. Since 9/11, the terrorist organizations have established a distinct ecosystem and industry. We are no longer talking about the lone wolves or violent terrorist organizations alone. There is a symbiotic nexus between the three critical entities: violent extremists, criminal economics, and state sponsorship of terrorism. Technology has been an enabler in the recent past. Today's terrorist is also a technological mastermind who employs developing technologies innovatively to his advantage. Sometimes we simplistically assume that the technologies that influence terrorism would primarily be in the fields of weapons and explosives, but no. It is the innovations in computing, telecommunications, internet access, encryption, uses of the VPNs that have been leveraged optimally by terrorist organizations to aid the spread of radicalization. The deft use of social media by the organizations like ISIS to overwhelm 21st century militaries, the successful use of drones to target Saudi oil installations, the dropping of the war material through drones across the border in Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir, and cyber attacks against government entities are just a few examples of their wide-ranging technological prowess. The transnational terrorism and organized crime need a detailed analysis. The interplay between the transnational terrorism and organized crime shows that the combination thrives most in the poorly governed spaces and conflict regions. For the audience to fully comprehend the linkages between terrorism and transnational organized crime, I would like to highlight the state protection given to crime syndicate responsible for the 1993 Mumbai blast. Not only did our western neighbor give them state protection, but also afforded them five-star hospitality. The growth of both transnational terrorism and organized crime is driven by a variety of factors, and the antidote to the twin challenges does not lie in the realm of security alone. A strong and well-coordinated national security architecture, sophisticated border mechanisms, a robust legal system, and effective structures of governance are equally critical. The cohesive action between the multidimensional and multilateral approach is the essence. Dealing with terrorism, therefore, especially that of transnational and global variety, is going to be a monumental challenge for all of us. Cohesive action needs to be taken at the global, regional, and national levels. The first objective should be to end the state sponsorship of terrorism. The international community must demonstrate the resolve and determination to condemn and comprehensively sanction states responsible for sponsoring terrorism. A coordinated global effort to remove the sanctuaries and support infrastructure, including financing, training, recruitment, and equipping, is essential. There has got to be comprehensive cooperation between all the nations. Having been a victim of terror for long, India has been engaged in persuading the governments across the world to take a united stand on terrorism. We have established joint working groups on the counter-terrorism with a number of countries like our own regional groupings such as BIMSTEC, along with the other like-minded nations like US, France, UK, and Russia, amongst others, in order to evolve a formal mechanism for cooperation and coordinated response. There is a need for a collective strategy and action plan. In formulating a multinational counter-terrorism strategy, besides checking violence, we have to isolate and combat the ideology which is irrational and not acceptable to the modern civil society. We have to use all the elements of national power, not just the military, but also political, economic, and other kind of persuasions and pressures. Some important elements of such a collective strategy and action plan would be, firstly, to establish the establishment of the UN-mandated regional counter-terrorism centers with experts from different countries who would work under a common umbrella to provide professional guidance and secretarial support to the political leadership and monitor the implementation of their resolutions in letter and spirit. Secondly, the capacity building in combating terrorism of intelligence, police, military, and paramilitary forces through training in each other's schools of instructions, thereby learning from each other, would be required to attain varied experience. There has to be greater liaison and coordination of counter-terrorism operations. This would also require certain amount of interoperability. The backbone of such interoperability is sets of common interoperable communication systems and standard operating procedures. Interoperability of equipment that is required for the counter-terrorism operations, which does not involve heavy weaponry alone. Rather, it requires force multipliers which enable better day and night surveillance, faster decision making, and accuracy to avoid collateral damages. A common database at the global and regional level, a multilateral, bilateral intelligence sharing, and a mechanism for joint interrogation of terrorist leaders and key terror suspects is also essential. Legal assistance to each other in the matters related to investigation and prosecution is yet another field of cooperation. There has got to be a more comprehensive role for the multilateral fora. We have seen that the UN-sponsored sanctions have had limited success thus far in addressing the state sponsorship of terrorism. This is particularly true in the case of non-state actors resident in the particular state but operating across state boundaries. The Al-Qaeda Sanctions Committee and the monitoring team created to implement the UN resolutions through travel bans, imposition of armed embargoes, freezing of assets, and name and shame tactics have had only negligible impact. The global counter-terrorism strategy adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2006 also failed to produce concrete achievements. Outside the UN, other multilateral and regional bodies and initiatives have doubled their efforts post 9/11. Normative efforts at the United Nations need to be coordinated through collaboration with other fora like FATF, which is playing a significant role in setting global standards for preventing and combating money laundering and terrorist financing. Now, to conclude, terrorism remains the most pervasive and serious challenge to the international security. A coherent approach on the part of the entire international community through early conclusion of a comprehensive convention on global terrorism is now a necessity. The aim should be to ban all terror groups and shut down terror camps regardless of their objectives, and to prosecute all the terrorists under special laws, and to make cross-border terrorism an extraditable offense worldwide without any exceptions. We have also consistently stated that violent extremism need to be delinked from religion, ethnicity, or identity. Closer home, notwithstanding the fact that the world's geoeconomic pivot may be shifting to Asia, terrorism continues to be one of the core impediments in the realization of the Asian century. I am glad that, therefore, that this conference brings together the subject matter experts from diverse regions and fields to share their experiences and points of view and generate discussions on the never-ending nature of this global threat and attempt to suggest ways to limit its adverse impact through joint endeavors. We are keen to learn from your experience and look forward to the studying of key takeaways at the end. With these words and thoughts, I conclude. I'm sure that the conference will generate fruitful deliberations and yield concrete action points for policymakers. Thank you once again for inviting me. It has been a pleasure interacting with you. Jai Hind.